What started out as a mere small trading operation, it eventually became a governing power, a state within a state, almost like a deep state as we know it today. It collected taxes, controlled armies, and eventually will go over and rule over 200 million people in the Indian subcontinent. For all intents and purposes, this wasn't colonization by a nation. It was control by a corporation. And so these companies, whether it would be the Dutch, the British, or the French, weren't just colonizing nations all over the world. They were competing. They all fought over trade routes, spices, silks, and most importantly, access to Asia. And this eventually didn't just become a simple competition of economic and political, it became militarily. These companies, whether it was the British East India Company, the Dutch East Indies, these companies had built armies, hired mercenaries, and eventually would go to war with each other. In this era of globalization, they didn't just begin with peace, but also began with corporate warfare. But here was the most important part of this story. Even though these companies had ruled over millions of peoples and had the access and the legal right to wage war, they too had also had limits. Because at the end of the day, they also had to answer to their big bosses back in Europe. And so they couldn't grow too powerful without triggering resistance, and not just resistance from the nation that they had conquered, but also from each other. Because if one company controlled too much trade, it would then threaten the balance of power and entire empires and kingdoms back in Europe. And so for this reason, alliances began to form. Rivalry still intensified, but the dominant players were always constantly checked each other. Eventually, over the centuries, something had changed. The governments began to realize that these companies would just become way too powerful for them to control. And so they eventually did control it. The British Crown then absorbed the East India Company. The other companies were either dismantled or outright regulated. And so the age of corporate warfare and empires ruling the vast oceans and seas was ending, or at least it appeared to be. What this period reveals is something deeper than history.